Mara Dalton stood in front of the mirror, taking a slow breath as she looked at herself in the long white wedding dress. Everyone in town had always said she was a woman who could not be ignored. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and strong from years of helping her father on the ranch. Her size had never embarrassed her, but today it felt like the whole world was staring at her, even though she was completely alone in the dressing room. Outside the window, she could hear music, laughter, and the excited voices of guests waiting for the ceremony to begin. The church bell had already rung once. The ladies from town were probably whispering about how beautiful she looked and how lucky her fiancé, Henry Carver, must be. But inside Mara's heart, there was no excitement, only a tight, heavy knot that refused to go away. She stared at her reflection again. The dress was lovely, simple, lace on the sleeves, and fitted at the waist. Her auburn hair was braided into a crown, pinned with little white flowers the women from town had picked that morning. She looked like a bride from a storybook, but she didn't feel like one. For weeks, she had pushed away her doubts. She told herself that Henry was a good man, polite, well-spoken, charming when he wanted to be. He had asked her to marry him with a smooth confidence that made her father proud. A strong match for a strong girl, people had said. But last night everything changed. Henry admitted, quietly, casually, that he had hidden something important from her. He had debts, large debts, money he owed to people back in another town. It wasn't the debt itself that hurt her. Mara was not the kind of woman to judge someone for struggling. What hurt was the lie. He had waited until the night before their wedding to tell her, and he talked about it like it was only a small detail, something she should not question. "You don't need to worry about it," he had said with a smile. "It doesn't concern you." But it did concern her. She was about to share a life with him. She wanted honesty, respect, a partner who understood who she was and didn't try to make decisions for her. She wasn't a girl who needed protecting. She was a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet, but she still wanted someone who would stand beside her, not above her. All morning she tried to push her feelings aside. She tried to convince herself that every couple had problems. She told herself that maybe she was being too sensitive. Maybe she should just get through the ceremony and see what happened afterward. But as she stood in the quiet room now, seconds before the wedding march began, the truth became clearer and clearer. She did not trust Henry, and she could not marry someone she did not trust. Her breath shook. She touched the lace on her sleeve, the smooth fabric beneath her fingertips, but the beautiful dress no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a costume. It felt like she was pretending to be a woman ready to start a life she did not want. The door opened without a knock. Her cousin Sarah peeked inside, smiling brightly at first, until she saw Mara's troubled face. "Everyone's ready," Sarah said softly. "Are you okay?" Mara opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she said, "I can't do this." Sarah's eyes widened. For a moment, she stood frozen, unsure what to say. Mara loved her cousin, but she couldn't stand still and whisper secrets while the whole town waited outside. She lifted her skirt, gathered it in her powerful hands, and walked straight past Sarah into the hallway. Her heart pounded as she stepped outside the double doors of the dressing room. Everything looked brighter, louder, more overwhelming than before. The sunlight from the stained glass windows painted colors across the floor. Voices were echoing in the chapel beyond the closed doors. Someone called out, "Where's the bride?" Mara didn't answer. She pushed open the door to the side courtyard instead of entering the chapel. As soon as she stepped outside, the warm air wrapped around her. She could smell the dust from the road, the faint scent of the horses tied near the hitching post, and the wildflowers someone had placed in a vase by the door. She had spent her whole life in this town. These smells were familiar, calming. But today her mind was too full for comfort. She walked faster, the long dress brushing the ground. She didn't care if it got dirty. A few guests saw her through the courtyard fence and gasped. Mrs. Wells covered her mouth. Two young boys stopped chasing each other and stared. The minister, standing near the entrance, called out gently, "Mara, is everything all right?" She didn't slow down. She didn't look back. She headed toward the stables at the edge of the church property, needing space, needing air, needing to be far away from expectations. Inside her chest, her heart felt like a drum. Every step felt heavy. But she pushed forward anyway. When she reached the wide barn doors, she finally stopped. Her hands were shaking slightly. She leaned against the wooden post and shut her eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself. "I can't pretend everything is fine. I can't marry someone who thinks I'm easy to fool." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with frustration and sadness. She felt like she was letting everyone down. Her father, who had planned the whole wedding with such pride. Her friends, who had helped her choose flowers. The guests, who had come from faraway towns. But she knew deep inside that marrying Henry would be a bigger mistake than disappointing them all. Footsteps approached from behind, slow and steady. For a moment she thought it might be her father or Sarah, but when she turned around, it was Colt Ryland. Colt was a cowboy who lived on a ranch a little outside of town. Quiet, reliable, and careful with his words. He had helped her father many times during busy seasons, and Mara had known him for years, though they were never very close. He was the kind of man who watched more than he spoke. People trusted him because he didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He stopped a few steps away, giving her space. His hat was in his hand, and his dark hair was slightly messy, as if he had rushed when he heard she had run outside. "Mara," he said gently, "you all right?" She wanted to be angry, to send him away, to tell him she didn't need anyone. But she could not bring herself to shout at Colt. He didn't have the sharpness of Henry's words or the judgment she feared from others. He simply looked at her with calm concern. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but the words felt false. Colt didn't challenge her. He simply nodded, as if to say he was there if she wanted to speak. That alone made her chest tighten. Why was it so easy for him to stand quietly and wait, when everyone else seemed to want answers or explanations? She sighed deeply. "You should go back. They'll start wondering where you went." "They already are," Colt said softly. "But I figured you'd rather see a friendly face instead of a dozen curious ones." She looked away, feeling embarrassed. "I didn't want to make a scene." "Walking out of your own wedding tends to do that," Colt said, but his voice held no judgment. There was even a small, warm smile on his face, the kind that tried to lift her spirits, not mock her. Mara shook her head. "I can't go back in there." "You don't have to," he said simply. His calm acceptance surprised her. Everyone expected the bride to smile and be perfect. Colt was the first person to tell her she didn't have to force anything. She felt something in her loosen, a breath she had been holding since that conversation with Henry the night before. Colt stepped a little closer, still keeping a respectful distance. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" Mara hesitated. She had never been good at sharing her feelings. People usually assumed they knew what she wanted because she looked strong. But today, she felt anything but strong. Finally, she said, "He lied to me." Colt didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "About something important?" "Yes," she whispered. "And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't matter." Colt nodded again, slow and thoughtful. "You deserve honesty, Mara. Everyone does." The simple words brought tears to her eyes, though she tried hard not to show it. A few long seconds passed. The breeze brushed the loose strands of her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The world felt quiet and far away, like she and Colt were standing in a bubble no one else could enter. Then she said the words she had been holding on to with shaking hands. "I told him to leave. I told him he can't handle me." Colt looked at her steadily, his expression serious now. "You're not someone who needs handling." The way he said it, calm, steady, sure, made something warm spread in her chest. No one had ever said that to her before. She exhaled, a long, shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking him for his words, his understanding, or simply for being there. Colt put his hat back on, keeping his eyes on her. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said gently. "You just need space. And I'm here if you need someone to walk with you." For a moment, Mara felt herself soften, the tension easing in her shoulders. Maybe she didn't have everything figured out. Maybe she didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing. Walking away from the wedding was the right choice. And she was grateful, more than she could say, that the first person to find her was someone who didn't want anything from her. Someone who simply wanted her to breathe again. Colt did not move right away. He stood near the barn door watching Mara quietly, giving her time to breathe. He knew she was overwhelmed. Anyone could see it in the way she held her shoulders tight and avoided looking toward the church. She looked like someone trying hard not to fall apart in front of others. Mara, on the other hand, could not understand why Colt was still there. Most people would have hurried back to report the situation, or worse, tried to drag her back inside to calm the guests. But Colt didn't seem interested in gossip or pressure. He simply stood there with a steady expression that made her feel strangely safe. Finally, she spoke in a soft but firm voice. "You should go back before someone thinks I asked you to come." Colt shook his head. "Nobody asked me. I came because you looked like you needed someone." That simple sentence made her chest tighten again. She was used to being the one people asked for help, not the one who needed it. "I'm not helpless," she said, a little sharper than she meant. Colt didn't flinch. "I know. You never have been." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The wind rustled through the open barn door, making the dust rise slightly from the floorboards. The quietness between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt steady, like the kind of silence that came from someone who knew how to listen. Mara stepped away from the wooden post and walked deeper into the barn, letting the dim light hide the mixture of frustration and sadness in her eyes. A few horses lifted their heads when she passed, curious but calm. Colt followed her slowly. "Where are you going?" "Anywhere that isn't full of people waiting for me to pretend." "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. She stopped walking and turned around. "Everyone expects me to be brave. To be sure, to make the right decisions. But I'm not sure of anything right now." Colt nodded, understanding more than she realized. "You don't have to be sure today." Mara looked away again, her fingers curling around the edge of her dress. "Why are you talking to me like this? Like I'm allowed to be unsure?" "Because you are," he said, taking a few steps closer. "Everyone gets to have a moment where things feel too big, even you." She felt a crack in her chest, the kind that came when someone finally said the thing you had been too afraid to admit. "Colt, I don't want to go back," she whispered. "I don't want to face all those people. I don't want to explain." "You don't have to explain anything to anyone." Mara almost laughed. "You think they'll just go home quietly?" "No," Colt responded honestly. "But you don't owe them your peace." His words surprised her again. They were gentle, but they carried a truth she had been avoiding. Suddenly, she felt tears prick her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She wasn't used to crying in front of anyone, especially not in front of Colt Ryland, the one person who seemed to see through her walls without trying. "I need air," she said. Colt nodded immediately. Let's go somewhere quieter. I can't walk through town like this, she protested. You won't have to. We'll take the back path. She hesitated. She didn't want him to follow her just because he felt pity. And yet, the thought of walking alone with her thoughts felt heavy. Why are you helping me? She asked. Colt met her eyes with a calm expression. Because you looked like you were about to fall apart, and I didn't want you to be alone when that happened. Mara inhaled slowly, surprised by the kindness in his voice. For a man who didn't talk much, Colt always chose his words carefully, and somehow that made every word feel sincere. Fine, she whispered. Let's go. Colt didn't smile triumphantly or look relieved. He simply nodded and stepped aside so she could walk out first. He always respected her space. That was one of the things she appreciated about him but never said aloud. They walked out of the barn and toward the small gate that led to the narrow path behind the churchyard. The path was quiet, lined with tall grass and small wildflowers. It led to the hills overlooking the town. Mara had been there many times before, usually alone, whenever she needed clarity. Colt walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, exactly beside her. They didn't talk at first. The sound of their footsteps in the dust was the only noise. The silence between them was peaceful, steady, and unforced. After a while, Colt spoke gently. When you ran outside earlier, you looked like someone yelled at you. Mara shook her head. No one yelled. They were just confused, worried. But I couldn't stay there one more second. Understandable. She glanced at him. Really? You think it's understandable to run out of your own wedding? If your heart told you it wasn't right, he replied calmly. Then yes. His certainty made her chest tighten with a mix of relief and sadness. Henry thinks I overreacted. Colt frowned slightly. He talked to you? Last night, she explained. He told me about his debt and acted like it didn't matter. Like it wasn't something I had the right to know. That's not a small thing, Colt said, his voice soft but firm. It matters, and he should have told you sooner. Mara looked ahead, her eyes focusing on a small patch of sunlight on the road. He told me I shouldn't worry because he'd take care of it, as if I'd marry him without knowing the truth. Colt shook his head. You're someone who wants honesty, someone who deserves it. She didn't answer for a moment. Her throat felt tight again. She was so used to being told she was strong, capable, independent, but no one ever told her she deserved honesty. It was strange how much those simple words affected her. Colt, she finally said, I told him he couldn't handle me, and I told him to leave. Colt walked silently for a moment before replying. Maybe you weren't telling him to leave your life forever. Maybe you were just telling him to stop trying to control things. Mara blinked, surprised by the perspective. I didn't think about it that way. Sometimes people try to lead when they should be walking beside you. She turned her head slightly. Are you walking beside me, Colt? He didn't hesitate. Always. She wasn't sure why those words made her heart beat quicker. Maybe it was the way he said them, with calm sincerity, without expectation. Maybe it was because Colt wasn't the kind of man who made promises easily. When he said something, he meant it. They reached the start of the hill, and Colt paused. Want to sit for a while? Mara nodded, feeling tired from the emotional weight of the morning. They climbed up the hill together, and when they reached the top, the town stretched out below them, small houses, a few shops, and the tiny church where the guests were still probably whispering. Mara sank onto the grass, letting the breeze cool her heated face. Colt sat a short distance from her, not crowding her, but close enough that she didn't feel alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence felt natural between them. Finally, Colt said, You did something brave today. Mara laughed quietly. Brave? Most people probably think I embarrassed everyone. Not everyone, Colt said. I think you did what was right for yourself. That's brave. She looked at him carefully. His eyes were steady, warm in the soft sunlight. He wasn't trying to impress her or fix her problems. He was just telling the truth as he saw it. I don't feel brave, she admitted. I feel confused. And guilty. Why guilty? Because I know my father is disappointed, and the guests came for a celebration, and I know Henry feels humiliated. Colt sighed softly. Maybe, but none of that is more important than your happiness. She hugged her knees to her chest. I don't even know what I want anymore. That's all right, Colt said. Sometimes you just have to take one step at a time. She tilted her head slightly. And what step am I supposed to take now? Colt met her eyes. Let yourself breathe. Let yourself think. Don't rush into explanations or decisions. She inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. He was right. She didn't need to have all the answers today. Colt looked out over the town. You know, he said quietly, everyone thinks of you as someone strong. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone. Mara swallowed hard. I don't like needing people. He shook his head gently. It's not about needing people. It's about letting the right people be there for you. She looked at him thoughtfully. Are you saying you're one of those people? Colt's voice was soft but certain. If you'll let me be. For the first time that day, Mara felt a small spark of relief, like she wasn't standing at the edge of everything alone. Colt had shown up without judgment, without expectation, without demands, just quiet support. She breathed out, long and slow. Thank you, Colt. He nodded once. Anytime. They sat there together watching the town from above. The wedding guests would eventually realize she wasn't coming back. They would talk, they would guess, they would discuss it for weeks. But up here, none of that mattered. For the first time all day, Mara felt like she could finally breathe. Mara sat on the hilltop, her dress spread around her like a soft white cloud. The wedding she had run away from now felt like it belonged to someone else, someone she barely recognized. Down below, the tiny church looked peaceful from a distance, almost unaware of the storm happening inside her heart. Colt sat a few feet away, quietly giving her the space she needed. His calm presence felt comforting, like a warm blanket over her shoulders on a cold morning. Most people would have filled the silence with questions or advice, but Colt didn't. He simply waited, and that alone made her feel less alone. After a long stretch of quiet, Mara finally spoke. I feel like I disappointed everyone. Colt looked toward her gently. You didn't disappoint me. She breathed out slowly, trying to keep her emotions steady. Why does that matter to me more than it should? Colt didn't act surprised by her honesty. Because sometimes the people who stay quiet and steady end up mattering more than the ones who make the most noise. She let out a small laugh, though it sounded tired. Are you calling yourself quiet and steady? I suppose so, he said with a soft smile. She shook her head gently. It's strange. I've known you for years, but today, I don't know. It's like I'm seeing a different side of you. He looked down at the grass. Maybe you just never needed me before. Those words made her pause. She wrapped her arms around herself as a breeze passed over the hill. I don't like needing anyone, Mara whispered. I always thought needing someone made me weak. Colt shook his head. It doesn't. It just makes you human. Mara looked out toward the open land beyond town, the fields, the far-off hills, the winding road that led to other places she'd never visited. She always imagined her future with clear steps, clear plans. But now everything in front of her felt unknown, like fog hanging over her path. And strangely, She wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. After a while, Colt spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "What scared you the most about what Henry told you last night? The debt? Or something else?" Mara took her time answering. She stared down at her hands, at the way her fingers trembled slightly before she clasped them together. "The debt wasn't what scared me," she finally said. "It was the way he talked about it. Like it wasn't something that mattered. Like my feelings weren't part of the situation." Colt nodded slowly. "You felt left out of the truth." Mara swallowed hard. "Exactly. I don't want a partner who hides things until they become too big to ignore. I don't want someone who thinks I'm too fragile to understand real problems." She lifted her gaze toward him. "Do you know what people always tell me? That I'm strong. Strong enough to carry anything. Strong enough to handle anyone. But Henry still treated me like I was someone who needed to be protected from the truth." Colt took in her words quietly. "Strength doesn't mean people should hide things from you. It means they should trust you even more." Something inside her eased at that. She sighed and leaned back, letting her palms rest on the grass. "I wasn't just scared, Colt. I was angry. Not because he had problems. Everyone does. But because he didn't trust me enough to share them. He looked at me like I was some fragile thing that might break." Colt's voice softened. "You're not fragile. Not even close." "I know," she said. "But I still want someone who believes in my strength. Not someone who pretends all problems disappear if we smile enough." Colt looked at her thoughtfully. "You want a partner, not a protector." She nodded. "Yes, someone who stands beside me, not in front of me or behind me." The breeze brushed the loose strands of her hair, and she pulled her knees close to her chest. She felt Colt's eyes on her, not in a judging way, but in a way that told her he was really listening. Really understanding. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "What made you follow me today? You could have stayed inside like everyone else." Colt took a long breath, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I guess I've always had a habit of watching from the sidelines. I see things people don't notice. I knew the moment you stepped out of that church that you weren't running away. You were trying not to break down in front of everyone." Mara looked at him carefully. "How did you know?" Colt gave a shy smile. "Because I've felt that way before." She shifted slightly closer. "When?" He hesitated at first, as though deciding how much of himself to share. Finally, he spoke. "When I was a kid," he began, "my father used to leave for long stretches, weeks, sometimes months. He'd come back with stories about how he needed time to think, or how he was trying to figure out life. I used to sit on the porch waiting for him, hoping he'd stay for good that time." Mara listened quietly, her heart softening. "One day," Colt continued, "I realized he wasn't coming back in the way I wanted. Not really. He was the kind of person who didn't know how to stay, and I promised myself I'd never be like that. I'd never run from people I cared about. I'd stand with them, even if it was uncomfortable." Mara's voice softened. "That must have been hard for you." Colt shrugged gently. "It taught me something important. When someone is hurting, the worst thing you can do is leave them alone." Mara swallowed the lump in her throat. "Is that why you came after me?" "Yes," Colt said simply. "Because no one should sit on a hill alone on their wedding day." His honesty made her chest feel warm, like someone had lit a small lantern inside. She wasn't used to people being so open with her. Austin, her father, always meant well, but rarely talked about feelings. Henry had been charming but distant when it mattered. But Colt's quiet honesty felt like a rare thing. Mara looked down again. "I didn't just run because of Henry. she confessed. I ran because I was scared of myself, scared of choosing wrong, scared of ending up trapped in a life that didn't feel like mine. And now? Colt asked gently. She hesitated. Now I'm scared of what comes next. He nodded, understanding without judgment. That's normal. She gave him a tired smile. How do you always know what to say? I just say the truth, he replied softly. Most people avoid the truth because they're scared of hurting others. But sometimes the truth is the only thing that helps. She wrapped her arms around herself again, thinking deeply. Colt, do you think I made the right decision? He leaned back, resting one hand on the grass. I think you made the right decision for yourself, and that's what matters most. But what if everyone blames me? She asked. They might, Colt said honestly. But they'll forget. People always forget. What you'll remember is whether you followed your heart or ignored it. She looked at him with quiet gratitude. You make everything sound so simple. It's not simple, Colt corrected. It's just clear. They fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt like the kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other more than before. After a long moment, Colt said, You don't have to decide your whole future today, just take one breath at a time. Mara nodded slowly. I think I can do that. He stood up and offered her his hand, not forcefully, not insistently, just kindly. Come on, Colt said. Let's walk. You don't have to go back to the church, but staying up here alone isn't good either. She looked at his hand, then into his eyes. There was no pressure, no expectation, only calm support. She placed her hand in his, and for the first time since the wedding morning began, she felt steady. Colt helped her up gently. When she stood, she let out a long, deep breath, as if releasing all the fear she had been carrying. Together they started walking down the hill, slowly, side by side, and Mara realized something quietly powerful. She wasn't afraid of what came next. Not anymore. Mara walked down the hill with Colt by her side, her dress brushing lightly against the tall grass. She still felt a little shaky inside, like someone learning how to stand again after falling, but she was no longer drowning in her thoughts. Colt's presence beside her was steady, like a quiet lighthouse guiding her through fog. They took the narrow dirt path that curved around the back of the town. Birds flew overhead, and the warm afternoon sun made the fields glow a soft gold. The world looked peaceful, even if her heart was still sorting itself out. After a long stretch of silence, Mara took a deep breath. Do you think everyone has gone home by now? Colt shook his head gently. Knowing this town? Probably not. Folks like to stay and talk. Mara rolled her eyes, though the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. They'll have a year's worth of gossip from this. Maybe, Colt replied, but people forget faster than you think. I hope so, she murmured. I don't want this to follow me forever. Colt looked at her softly. It won't. People will move on, and you'll move on too. She felt comforted by those words, even if she wasn't sure what moving on meant yet. The path led them toward a tall oak tree where the view of the town was clear. They paused there, letting the breeze cool the heat from the long walk. After a moment, Colt said, Do you want to head back to your father's ranch? I can walk with you. Mara hesitated. I'll have to face him eventually. He loves you, Colt reminded her. Even if he's surprised right now. I know, she said, but I feel like I ruined the day he was so proud of. Colt thought for a moment. Maybe he was proud of the wedding, but he'll be even prouder when he sees you stayed true to yourself. Mara smiled quietly. It was the kind of smile that came from a tired heart finding a little peace. They kept walking, now taking the path that led toward the edge of town. The ranch wasn't far, maybe a short ride on horseback, but on foot, It felt like a long journey, not because of the distance, but because of what waited at the end. "Colt," she said after a while, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you think Henry is angry?" Colt paused before he answered. "He might be confused, maybe a little embarrassed, but he'll be all right." "I didn't mean to embarrass him," Mara said softly. "I just couldn't pretend anymore." "You didn't do anything wrong," Colt said gently. "Sometimes endings are painful, even if they're right." Mara sighed. "I just hope he finds someone who suits him better." "He will," Colt replied calmly, "and you'll find someone who suits you better too." Mara glanced at him, her heart giving a small, unexpected flutter. She didn't say anything in response, but Colt's words settled warmly inside her. They walked past the edge of the small market street. A few people glanced their way, Mara in her slightly dusty wedding dress, Colt walking beside her, but no one approached them. Colt's steady presence seemed to shield her from curious questions. Once they reached the outskirts of town, the scenery changed. The road widened, the fences became familiar, and the distant sound of cows and horses drifted across the fields. Mara slowed her steps. "It feels strange walking home like this." "You're not walking home alone," Colt reminded her. "No," she said softly. "I guess I'm not." They reached the ranch gate. The big wooden sign that her father carved years ago hung proudly above it. She paused there, gripping the top bar gently. What if he's upset? Colt leaned on the fence beside her. "He might be at first, but he'll understand. He raised you to be strong. Strong people make hard choices." Mara looked down at her hands. "I'm afraid he thinks I ran away because I was scared." "You ran away because you were honest," Colt said. "There's a difference." She breathed in deeply. The smell of hay, soil, and warm wood filled her senses. Home always had a way of grounding her. Suddenly, she heard the front door creak. Her father, Austin Dalton, stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a cloth. When he saw Mara in her wedding dress, dusty but standing tall, his eyes widened. "Mara?" he said, his voice full of surprise. "What happened?" She swallowed hard, then took a few steps forward. "I couldn't marry Henry, Pa." Austin stared at her, then looked at Colt for a moment before turning back to his daughter. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said quickly. "Not at all." "Did Henry do something?" "No," she said again. "It wasn't something he did today. It's something he didn't tell me until last night." Austin studied her face, his expression softening. "You don't need to explain everything. I just need to know you're all right." Mara felt tears fill her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm all right. Better than I thought I'd be." Austin walked down the porch steps and pulled his daughter into a gentle embrace. "You don't have to do anything that doesn't feel right. You hear me? Nothing." She nodded against his shoulder. "Thank you, Pa." When they separated, Austin looked at Colt. "Thank you for walking her home." Colt tipped his hat slightly. "Any time, sir." Austin gave a warm nod and headed back inside, giving them space. Mara let out a long breath of relief. "See?" Colt said softly. "He understands." "You were right," Mara admitted. Colt smiled faintly. "I'm glad." They walked toward the fence near the barn, leaning against it as the sun began to lower in the sky. The day that started with panic and fear was settling into something calmer, something that didn't hurt as sharply. Mara looked at Colt with gratitude. "Thank you for today, truly. If you hadn't followed me, I think I would have broken down completely." Colt shook his head. "You wouldn't have. You're stronger than you think." "But it still meant something to have you there," she said. Colt looked at her with quiet sincerity. "I'm glad I could be there." Mara hesitated for a moment, then asked gently, Why did you care so much? Why did you come after me instead of staying with the others?" He held her gaze. "Because I couldn't watch you walk away alone, and because I care about you more than you know." Her heart caught in her chest. She wasn't expecting that. She wasn't expecting the softness in his voice or the honesty in his eyes. She took a small breath. "Colt, I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," he said with a small smile. "But I wasn't going to pretend. Not today." Mara didn't look away. For the first time since the morning, her heart felt something warm, something new, something hopeful. "I don't know what happens next," she said honestly. "Not with Henry, not with my life, not with anything." "You don't have to know," Colt replied. "Not today." She looked at him quietly. "But I do know one thing." "What's that?" "That I'm grateful it was you who found me," she said softly. "Not anyone else. Just you." Colt's eyes softened. "And I'm glad it was me too." The sky glowing orange above them, the ranch warm behind them, and the future stretching wide and open in front of her, Mara realized something powerful. She didn't need someone to handle her. She just needed someone who understood her, someone steady, someone honest, someone like Colt Ryland. Colt didn't reach for her hand. He didn't rush a moment that wasn't ready yet. He simply stood beside her, exactly where she needed someone to be. And Mara, for the first time in a long time, felt calm about what tomorrow might bring. Not because life was suddenly perfect, but because she wasn't walking toward the future alone. They stayed by the fence as the sun dipped below the horizon, talking softly about nothing and everything. And Mara felt something new grow quietly inside her, a feeling she didn't rush, didn't name, but welcomed slowly. Hope.